Hey, it's Court. I wanted to let you know of some exciting updates that you might notice here on the show throughout the summer months. So first of all, Wednesday episode drops. Of course, if you're a longtime listener of the show, those are not going anywhere. You can still expect that highly actionable, highly valuable episode dropping for you every single Wednesday, as well as those guest double features that we always air back to back that so many of you have told me that you absolutely love. And then I'm going to be shifting gears a little bit behind the scenes to focus on some bigger strategic content and marketing tests, both on this show as well as on our client podcasts. So stay tuned because as always, you know that I'm going to lift the curtain and let you know exactly what you need to adopt and exactly what you need to avoid when it comes to growing your show. So whether you're a longtime listener or you're just finding the show for the very first time, thank you for tuning in, truly, because it is my ultimate honor to be your guide on this podcasting journey. So make sure you follow the show so that you're the first to know as soon as a new episode drops. And without further ado, here's today's episode. If you're a podcast host who has ever sat in your office or wherever you record your podcast and looked around at the four walls and wondered, is anybody really listening? Why aren't my listeners engaging? You are not alone. In fact, Conrad Weaver is a fellow podcast host who wondered the exact same thing. And inside of this live coaching session, we're breaking down what actually drives listener engagement and what you need to tweak inside your content so that your listeners feel moved and motivated to respond without you having to beg them. So when you walk away from this episode, I promise you're going to know the one key ingredient that you need to turn a one-way podcast broadcast into a two-way conversation that your audience is excited to be a part of so you can get them to engage and keep them coming back. Welcome to Insider Secrets to a Top 100 podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Elmer. Let's make your business binge-worthy. Conrad, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yes. Well, I'm so excited that you're here. I love digging into people's podcasts and just kind of picking things apart and then putting it back together and seeing how can we help you grow. So just to give a little bit of context, tell us what your show is about, and then give me a little bit of insight into what do you think is working really well with the show right now, and what have some of your sticking points been?
Yeah. So the show is called the First Responder Wellness Podcast. I'm not a first responder, but I produce documentaries primarily. But so I launched this show to kind of continue the conversation about wellness. I bring guests on the show. Every show is a guest-centered show where we bring experts from around the country to talk about mental health and wellness. Sometimes they're mental health experts. Sometimes they're first responders who have challenges. And so my primary audience are first responders. So firefighters, police officers, dispatchers, medics, that kind of thing. We're running close to 80 some episodes now with the current iteration of the show. And we're running 150 to 175 downloads. And I've kind of seen that stagnate a little bit. It's still on an upward trajectory, but very slow. But I'm not getting a lot of interaction with my listeners. So they're out there, they're maybe in their cruiser with their earbuds in and not responding or leaving comments. You know, I've got maybe 3 reviews on Apple Podcasts. So I'm really wanting to get more interaction from the audience so I can better serve them if I know better what they're wanting to hear.
Yes. Okay. This is so common too. And I think all of us have that desire deep down where it's like podcasting is a one-way channel, but we want people to talk back. We want it to be a two-way conversation, you know, and it kind of feels weird when you're in your office and you're like, all right, am I really reaching anybody? I'm curious though, Conrad, before we get into talking audience interaction and engagement, are you tracking the month-over-month growth of your podcast?
I'm not necessarily like keeping records of that, which I probably need to. I mean, it's there in the metrics.
Yeah.
I'm not honed in on it consistently.
You know that it's there, but you're not tracking consistently. Then that's okay. The reason I bring this up is because a lot of times I find that there is a tendency to look at downloads and then just make these conclusions in our mind about the health of our show based on the downloads we're getting per episode when it doesn't tell the whole picture. And I know that you know that. But when we can zoom out a bit and look at, is the show growing incrementally month over month? That can give us a little bit of just peace of mind to know that, yes, it's moving in the right direction. And then we can look at downloads as, now what are the patterns that are emerging from each of the episodes? And I know you had told me right before we hit record that some of your episodes actually get up to 200 or 300 downloads an episode.
Yeah, I've had, I think it hit as high as 400 on one of the shows. And it was somebody that was a pretty well-known first responder. So it was kind of a famous person. So, which was nice to see. It was nice to see that, hey, people are actually finding this. And if we look at subscribers, like on Apple, I know that they're close to 500, I think, subscribers on, but that doesn't tell you that they're all listening. So
Right. I know. Well, this is interesting though, because that episode that hit that higher download number, 400 or so, was a well-known person, pretty famous in the circles of your ideal audience. What was the topic of that episode? And where I'm really going with this is, have you noticed any patterns in specific topics or things that you're covering in those higher downloaded episodes?
I know one of the episodes that was a really well received episode. We were talking about moral injury, which was kind of the main theme of that one. And so that one received a lot of play because that's kind of a buzzword now in the first responder space. And so I think people are curious about that, what that is. Everybody knows kind of what PTSD is, but they don't necessarily know what moral injury is. So that was kind of one thing that resonated with a lot of people. The other episode that went viral in my standards, was with a former Army guy. He's written tons of books about, moral type of issues. And so that, I guess that could be perhaps a theme that is resonating with the audience.
One of the things I always suggest looking at is topic themes, kind of like you're pointing out here as you're thinking about it, like, yeah, maybe that's a thread to pull. Also keywords in those episodes, because a lot of times that can give clues into what people might be searching for. And maybe you did it without realizing, but there could be a keyword in that title or something that's getting picked up and it's getting a little bit more visible. So that's another angle we could look at. And then other patterns that emerge too. For example, with your episode titles of those higher downloaded or more popular episodes, are they following a particular pattern in the way that you're saying that title? Is it a how-to title? Is it a deeper kind of thought-provoking title? Or are they questions or that sort of thing? We can begin to kind of pick up on patterns and notice just through literally kind of looking at, okay, what episodes are the most popular? It can clue you into how your show might be getting found right now from an SEO perspective. Also, the topics that your current audience base is really enjoying. That may also, you could translate that into future listeners saying, yeah, they might be interested in that too. But then also other kind of thematic elements like, the way that you're titling your episodes or certain repetitive things that are coming up, with the way that the structure of the title or things like that. So those are all things to look at. And the reason I'm saying this is because when it comes to audience interaction, first, we want to make sure that the content is aligned to attract the audience that you're looking to reach. And you're very clear on who that audience is. Right. I'm curious, I know you're not getting a whole lot of feedback from your audience right now in terms of listeners of the podcast, but have you had conversations with first responders outside of the scope of the podcast? Is that something you talk to first responders on a regular basis?
I do.
You do?
Yeah. I'm in that first responder space. In fact, I'll be hanging out with a bunch of them tomorrow. And so I'm with them all the time. Yep.
Good. Okay. Are they telling you anything specifically in the conversations that you're having? Again, outside of the context of your podcast, but certain topics or certain things or certain pain points or problems that come up really frequently for them. Have you noticed any themes there?
Yes, I have. One of them is the area of leadership in the first responder space. There's a big problem there. And so that's everywhere I go across the country, and I travel pretty regularly. That's the number one thing that I'm hearing is leadership issues.
How does that translate for someone who maybe is in a role where they don't have great leadership? And how does that impact their job in the day-to-day?
Oh, it stresses them out. If you have a leader, in fact, I had someone on the show a while back, a police officer from New York, who said their leadership has no regard for them personally. They don't care about their mental health. They don't care about their health. They just want them to go out there and do their job and arrest people and, get the quotas and things like that. And she said, we just don't feel supported. And when you don't feel supported, you're looking to jump ship and you're looking to go someplace else. And so that's what I'm hearing from people around the country. That's
really good. Are there any other common problems, challenges, or themes that emerge?
That's one of the main ones is that leadership thing. In fact, the National FOP, Fraternal Order of Police, they're in their surveys, they say the top two stressors in law enforcement are organizational and internal stressors. So those are really the top two things. And then just the general, there's also issues with scheduling where you're working double shifts. There's not enough people. They can't even recruit people. I mean, it's like, 10, 20 years ago, they'd have 500 people apply for, 5 positions. Today, it's like 50 people apply. And then out of that 50, maybe 10 are actually qualified. And so the pool of people coming into the first responder space, especially law enforcement, is really small. And so that adds a lot of stress to all the officers on the street.
Yeah. How well positioned do you feel like your podcast is currently to address those specific challenges?
I have people on the show pretty regularly talking about those issues. So I really focus on that. I try to bring people on that are focused on that who have solutions. And I like to bring solutions to the podcast because I think that what adds value to my listener. And so I look for those kind of conversations to have.
Mm-hmm.
So
okay, great. One of the things that I saw an opportunity when I was looking at your podcast before we jumped on here is in your description. So in the description of your show, it's pretty clear and it's pretty succinct. Podcast for first responders and the people who lead them, featuring conversations about mental health and wellness with leaders from the first responder community. And I wonder, a couple of things here. First and foremost, this is discoverability, but I promise this is all going to come with audience interaction too, is we want to make sure the right people are finding your podcast and that when they're searching that your show is the one that's appearing, right? That you're appearing in those search results as often as you can, particularly for the problems that particular listener would be looking to solve. And so one of the things that I find happens a lot with us as experts, or, we've got an expertise around a topic, we see the whole picture and we see that, well, if you take care of your mental health in this context, that's going to help you with the stress of solving for these problems. So we focus on the mental health piece. Whereas really the listener right now is just hating their job because their leadership sucks. Or where they're just stressed because it's all this scheduling stuff and it's very competitive. And that's kind of the top of mind problem for them. So what I find is when you can begin to really gear your episodes and the way that you quote unquote sell a listener on why they should listen to solve those problems more than the benefit they're going to get out of it, it creates curiosity and it usually gets more clicks. And we're not just looking for clicks, right? We want people to hit play, but when they're clear on the payoff, because they're like, okay, this episode's going to touch on this specific problem. I have that problem. So therefore I'm curious, I want to listen. That can really help on the front end of the engagement piece that ultimately this is kind of the precursor to when we then want them responding and actually engaging with the content. We got to get them to listen to it first. So on the front end, that was one opportunity that I really saw with your podcast, where in the description, you could even go after some of those problems. Where right now, it kind of speaks to who it's for, which is great. And also, okay, we're talking about mental health and wellness, but what are they going to get out of that? How is it going to help somebody who right now is dealing in a very high stress situation, but also the internal stress that comes from that and managing the day-to-day of that? Because people engage when they're emotionally moved to do so. And when we can really clearly see the emotional payoff for something, why should I listen to that podcast? Why is that worth my time? When there's a payoff there, we'll invest our time. So when we as a host can make that payoff really clear, it really sets the foundation and sets the tone for the engagement that we're ultimately looking to get out of the show.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And it's interesting that you're saying payoff because today, I think I told you offline that I'm going through the John Maxwell leadership training. And today's topic was all about payoff in a talk. He said, you want to have a payoff every minute within your 30-minute talk. You want to have 30 payoffs. And so that's just like, okay, now that I'm hearing it twice from two different people, I need to pay attention.
Yes. Oh, the signs are pointing all in the right direction.
Right.
But this is it, Conrad. It's ultimately just, and this is for everyone listening, getting better at connecting the dots for our listeners. This is honestly, when I see gaps in messaging and positioning with the podcast, it's simply because we're not connecting the dots for our listeners, and your listeners are not going to connect them for you. And so what I mean by that is we have to be very clear in showing the payoff in all the elements of the show that we're communicating that payoff before they hit play so that it gets them invested in hitting play. And then, of course, continue to show that payoff in each and every episode. And that is why we come back to podcasts, and that's why we engage. And so when you start to do that over time, that engagement will naturally start to happen. And we're going to get into some specifics too of other things you can do to elicit that. But you'll be surprised where you'll just get a message out of the blue and someone will say, oh my gosh, I just heard what you said in such and such episode, and that really made a difference for me. And that's what we want. Right. But that payoff has to be clear.
Yeah, and I've had some of that. In fact, I had a firefighter from Australia who reached out. He said, "I've been listening to your show. I love your show. I want to talk to you." And we ended up having a Zoom conversation. I connected him to some resources. So that was a lot of fun to have that kind of interaction and that kind of response from a show.
Really cool. The thing that's coming up for me is this idea of being seen and supported, which at the end of the day, as podcast hosts, that's what we're here to help our audience do and to feel. If they don't feel seen, if they don't feel supported, they're going to be less likely to engage, whether that be through clicking play, through staying tuned in through an episode, through actually leaving a review. But for your people, especially Conrad, being that support for them that they don't have in their workplace and actually saying that, right? Calling that elephant out in the room. Like, I know that you don't have this kind of support. And that's probably why you're looking for a solution. That podcast is here to offer that solution in so many words, right? You can definitely have a better message and a little bit clearer positioning than that, but the heart of that message, right? And helping get people's buy-in on the front end. Because just like that person that reached out to you that was like, gosh, yeah, I feel supported. And almost in so many words, this is giving me what I don't have in my workplace.
Yeah, I like that. Thank you.
All right, so let me ask you this. So I know on your podcast on Apple, you've got 21 ratings, you've got 3 reviews. One of the things I like to do is I actually go and read the reviews on a podcast to see if we can mine any nuggets there. Your reviews were not as specific and detailed as we'd ultimately love to see them. And that's why I understand this is a pain point for you, right? Because it's like, we really can't get any information out there. Are people liking the show? I mean, I don't really know. All the ratings were positive though, which is a good thing. One of the things, again, people engage when they feel emotionally moved to do so. Within your episodes right now, tell me, how are you inviting them to engage?
So I'm inviting them to subscribe to share it with their tribe, as I say. And then I generally, every episode, ask them if they would, consider leaving a 5-star review.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And I love that you're doing it consistently. Going back to payoff, this is something I noticed too, can be really helpful, is actually showing them what the payoff of doing said thing is. And it doesn't necessarily have to always be a payoff that you're giving them. A lot of times people's minds will jump through like, do I need to do a giveaway or exchange my time and give, for their review or something like that. For following the show, the payoff there is that you're going to be the first one to know as soon as an episode drops. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a first access thing, and framing it that way. For reviewing, you're helping other people find the show who also need this too. Think of why we leave reviews on Amazon or something, right? Usually it's because we really were wowed and didn't expect to get the results we got from a product that we use and it blew us away, or we were really disappointed.
We had a problem.
Exactly. But this also translates into podcast reviews where that's also people's motivation. So we can understand people's motivation. Why would a first responder who might be busier than the average podcast listener, maybe was in the middle of your episode and got a call and they had to go, why would they leave a review? So when we can, again, connect the dots for them and start experimenting with that in episodes to see if you notice that changes anything. It's one small thing that we can do. Something else too is to design campaigns around a specific action that you want someone to take. So for example, you can use dynamic content for this. In fact, we've got one that we've got coming out on the show here in a few weeks where we want people to share the show. So I'm designing a certain campaign around that for that one specific thing that we want them to do. So this is also something you can play with, and where I would suggest utilizing this is maybe with reviews or whatever the thing is that you want people to, what action, maybe it's leaving a comment on Spotify, whatever it is. Pick one thing, figure out what the payoff is for them in doing that, and then design a specific campaign around a window of time in which you're really promoting that. And I think this is interesting about just human nature and psychology, but we kind of naturally get excited when other people are excited about something. And so if you're kind of putting forth an initiative on your podcast and you've got those really loyal listeners, that can help engage those people who maybe have listened to the podcast for a length of time but have never taken action. And so that can also be something that can help to jumpstart engagement. Because what's the other thing that we do? Well, we see if a bunch of people have left reviews, sometimes we want to jump into that conversation. Or if a bunch of people have left comments, sometimes that will spark something and we'll want to jump into that conversation. Mm-hmm. So sometimes just giving it a jump start can help. And maybe that's something you could even test on a quarterly basis. Okay, this quarter, we're going to do a review campaign on the show. You're not going to run it every episode because then people eventually tune it out. But maybe for 4 episodes, if you've got one going out every week, maybe that dynamic content plays at the beginning of the episode. And we're really steering people toward a specific action. And you can kind of review how that went and then see, okay, what do we need to tweak? And maybe tweak that for the next 4 episodes. And so that's another just quick and dirty kind of easy idea, actionable that you can implement and test. But painting the picture of audience engagement, it really does start with making sure that payoff is clear. So I'd love to see you doing that throughout your packaging and the gatekeepers and all the things I know you've heard me talk about here on the show. Making sure that's clear because that's going to set up someone's ability and desire to engage. And then when eliciting that engagement, whether it's, hey, follow the show, or hey, leave a review, or hey, we're doing this specific campaign and here's the thing we want you to do, also making sure that payoff is really clear. And it sounds like you're making the ask, which is really good. And that's another thing that I often think too, Conrad, is that, think about your experience as a listener. You might love that host. You might really connect with that host. But sometimes that host does feel a little untouchable. Where if they're not saying like, hey, send me an email, or hey, I want to hop on the phone with 3 listeners this month, and I really want to get a feel for what you're needing the most because we're doing some work on the show, whatever. And inviting them and giving them and frequent reminders that, number 1, you're human. Number 2, that you are accessible can also go a long way to getting that 2-way conversation going. And this is why the testing process is so key. And it's like, if I can have anyone walking away from this or any episode here on this show to really take to heart, is that in order to truly grow a podcast, you have to be willing to test and you have to be willing to fail. Not every test is going to work. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, Conrad, that this, you've definitely and clearly are testing things on your podcast, but this is really important. And I think a lot of times people are afraid to test. I know there was a season when I was like, well, if I change this, then what if I lose listeners or people hate it or, whatever. But as a host, we have to be willing to take those risks. So again, helping your audience really well and being consistent in communicating how you're helping them solve those problems. I think you're going to see a lot of engagement come over time just from that alone.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, thank you so much.
Conrad, thank you for being here, for being open and coachable, and best of luck to you and your podcast. You know where I am. If I can support in any way, let me know.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thanks you for the feedback. I really appreciate it.
And if you're sitting here listening to this and you're like, holy cow, I want to be in the hot seat, I need help with my podcast, then drop what you're doing right now, head to the show notes, and get on the waitlist. I swear, last time that we opened up spots to the waitlist, y'all made me feel like Taylor Swift. I'm not even kidding. Like, spots literally filled up within hours when we sent out a single email to get a chance in the hot seat here with me. So if you've been listening to this conversation and you're like, gosh, I really wish I could get Courtney's eyes on my show, now is your chance. You'll find that link in the show notes. And speaking of podcast listener engagement, chances are as a podcast host, you need to give a call to action on your podcast. I mean, I just gave one to you, right? Go get on the wait list. But suddenly when it comes down to actually giving the call to action or choosing which call to action to give, or should I give more than one, or is it okay if I ask them to follow and leave a review and give a call to action? Suddenly you're in your head and you're like, oh my gosh, how do I say all of this without sounding salesy, or worse, without pushing listeners away? And it turns out you're not alone in that either. Because in the next episode, I am answering a listener's question about how to give a call to action that actually converts without confusing your listeners and without sounding desperate, so that you can start giving CTAs that don't feel awkward, but that actually feel good. And more importantly, that get your listeners to engage and take action. All that's coming up next to help you make your business binge-worthy.